an original.
From Story Studio Network.
Well, here we go. Wednesday. It's the third day of May. In the old days, we'd be complaining about still writing April on our checks. Nobody's doing that anymore. I can't remember the last time I wrote a check. The only thing I did it for was to have a void check. And then what I've done is I've taken a picture of it and I keep it on my phone. So if somebody says, just send me a void check so we can, send you money directly to your account, I've got it. All that's easy to take. All right, here we go. Lots to talk about. I don't know about you, but my Facebook feed is it's all Gordon Lightfoot. Everything in my Facebook feed this morning was Gordon Lightfoot. So yesterday on Now and Next, we had a chat with Barb DiGiulio about, remembering Gord, and he passed away on Monday night at Sunnybrook Hospital, 84 years old. And as I noted yesterday, he and my dad were born same year. Dad was in May, Gordon November, 1938. And for, people talk about all the influences that you have in your life, too. Just a quick story. And I mentioned off the top of the show yesterday, the iconic album cover for Sundown. And there's Gord sitting in his denims, and he's got that cool silver bracelet on with the jade stone in it. I think it's jade. And he's clearly sitting in a barn because there's hay all around him. And right off of his right shoulder is that Sunburst 12-string Gibson B45 guitar. And that's the first chord out of that guitar you hear on the song Sundown. And when I was a kid, my dad was a real fan of all this, certainly Gordon Lightfoot and John Denver at the time and so on. So my dad was the one who actually convinced me that I needed a 12-string guitar. I didn't need much convincing. So anyway, we went out, and when I was 12, 13 years old, he bought me my Epiphone 12-string, which had the same shape and body, the same stock head as the Gordon Lightfoot guitar. And off I go. I still got it. It's in the next room. But I was noodling some of those songs yesterday, and I think about the two guys who probably had the most influence on my music was my dad and Gordon Lightfoot. So, born of the same vintage, 1938. And we're all, it's amazing the stories that have come up. So today in my feed, I'm flipping through, and a guy by the name of Bo Dixon is in my feed. We're friends on Facebook, and I had the opportunity to perform with Bo. He is a music director and an actor at Stratford. I'm a guy who does this shit off the side of my desk. So it was something to be able to work with him. And we worked on a show that I had written about Martin Luther King. And so we're back and forth all the time on Facebook and certainly other social media, and I'm keeping track of what he's doing. Today on his feed, he notes that the folks at Stratford have made the Northern Tracks free, and it's a feature on their website, Stratford's website. If you scroll down on the Northern Tracks window, you'll see what looks like an image of a cassette with Lightfoot written on it. I strongly encourage you to click on it because it's free, and there's an example of 4 different songs done by the folks at Stratford paying tribute to Lightfoot. And this is Bo Dixon on the piano. And he's a young guy whose dad was a pastor in Detroit.
Black day in July, Motor City madness has touched the countryside. And through the smoke and cinder, you can hear it far and wide. The doors are quickly bolted and the children locked inside. Black day in July.
And the phenomenal thing about this whole presentation is that there are 4 different songs that they have. There's not a guitar in sight. It's all piano, a cappella sometimes. But the cool thing about it is that all of a sudden it elevated Lightfoot's music to something that was theatrical for me, and I had never considered that. So, check out the website at Stratford. Go to Northern Tracks and treat yourself to 20 minutes of just an incredible interpretation of Gordon Lightfoot's music. The performances, the choice of the songs are exceptional. So I don't think we're going to stop talking about Gordon Lightfoot for a while. I'd love to have Bo on to talk about it. Maybe we'll do that next week. All right, here we go. It is Now and Next. Dave Trafford here for Story Studio Network, and waiting patiently on my monologue rant. Glad to welcome in Lisa Raitt. How are you?
Doing well, Dave. Very good. Thanks. I didn't mind that. I liked learning. So that's awesome. I'm going to go and click on that cassette.
You'll have to do that. You're a Lightfoot fan? Who's not?
Yeah. I guess I found him in my later years, not necessarily in my early years growing up in Cape Breton, but certainly big impact. Look, the guys who played the guitars around the campfires always had a Lightfoot song in the repertoire. So for sure, I knew the words. But I watched a CBC documentary on him one night about 18 months ago. I think I was in a hotel room somewhere and there was no cable and there's no internet. So it's me and the CBC. And it was fascinating. It was just fascinating. And I always meant to go back to watch the rest of it. And now I will.
I think it's on Gem, so you can find it on demand.
Yeah, I will.
And it's funny how often that piece has come up in the last couple of days. It's been a definitive documentary because it's so late in his life. I mean, I think it was only produced in 18 or 19, something like that. So it's fairly up to date. And I think it's
very authentic and truthful.
Oh, entirely. Yeah. And I think that there are things along the way, as I talk to people who are sort of my age, I was a teenager when he was really hitting his stride in the 70s and so on. And again, like I said off the top, informed my own love of playing of music and so on. But the cool thing is, I think we all took for granted a couple of things until he got sick. That, he's pretty special. And then when he got sick and came back and recovered, we had a whole different kind of relationship with him culturally right across the country. So, and I think that's what shows up in that documentary, really.
Yeah, it's very true. Yeah. Very true.
A few things I want to get to today. Let's talk about current news. And, this week we're talking about the news that pops up in the Globe and Mail. I guess they had done the initial reporting on this, suggesting that Conservative MP Michael Chong apparently was being targeted by Beijing. CSIS knew about it, didn't bother to say anything to him or his family.
I am shocked. First of all, if I'm sitting in government and yet another leaked report comes out, you got to be wondering what else is out there. So there are two options here. Either the government, whoever it is responsible for this, isn't reading the memos that CSIS is providing on members of parliament, which I think, would get a red star in terms of this is something that you really should read because it's impacting democracy in parliament. Either they're not reading it or they didn't care when they read it and didn't want to let them know because they're rolling into an election. Both of them are really problematic for me. Because I think you talk a lot about protection of people and you talk about why wouldn't you want to get into politics, and we talk about the social media aspect, but here's a real life example of someone whose extended family in Hong Kong was going to be targeted by Chinese government as a result of somebody fulfilling their parliamentary duties in Canada. That is just stunning to me. So I worry about who knew and who didn't know, and the decision they took not to inform him. And the second part is, well, okay, fine. We're going to pick over that carcass for a while. But more importantly, what are you going to do now? And the named operative from the Chinese government needs to be vacated from this country immediately. They got to go because you don't work against our democracy and you certainly don't threaten the family of members of parliament. And maybe I said to you at the top, Dave, I'm a little close to this. I really like Michael Chong. I like his family, and he's a good guy. But regardless if you're a good guy or not a good guy in parliament, he's a member of parliament, and you got to have some privilege around that and respect. So, Katie Telford famously said when she was interviewed or she appeared before a committee that the prime minister gets all the pieces of intelligence and he reads them all. Well, guess what? Now he's deemed to have read this. And as a result, he's deemed to have taken no action on it. And they've got to figure this out from a political point of view.
So I want to get back to that in a second, but just based on your years of experience as a parliamentarian, a cabinet minister, and without telling tales out of school, what is this extraordinary in terms of the flow of that level of briefing around national security intelligence?
It is.
It is.
It is extraordinary. It is extraordinary that you didn't get the heads up. I mean, Michael Chong is a former minister, so therefore he's a member of the King's Privy Council, which puts you on a higher level of dissemination of information, and you're sworn to secrecy, and you've got it for the rest of your life. That's why we have those initials PC, Privy Council, after our names when we're former ministers. So they can provide him with this kind of information without breaching confidentiality or top secrecy because he's got it already. So that's one aspect of it. But I will tell you a story. In my time when I was in opposition, I did get a phone call from a member of staff from the Minister of Foreign Affairs office. It was Marc Garneau. And Marc Garneau came across a piece of intelligence that he thought was valid for me to understand and know. And his team picked up the phone and called me on a Friday night at midnight to let me know this piece of information because he thought it was something I needed to know as a result of my time as a member of parliament and my time as a minister. And I never said anything to anyone. I never disclosed what it was. Did it help me? Absolutely, it helped me. It helped me understand and deal with the situation that was coming my way. That's just courtesy. But my gosh, when your family members are possibly threatened by the government that is their government in a foreign country, I think that even ups the ante even more. So there is opportunity for that to happen, and it just didn't happen in this case. Someone got the information. Someone made a decision not to tell him, and I want to know who.
So just to be clear, Garneau's office, their team called you after you had left politics.
No, I was a member of parliament.
Parliament,
yeah.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, I was a member. I was in opposition. And they called me and told me this and said, we're telling you because you're a minister, it's Privy Council. We think you should know. Mark thinks you should know.
Right.
And that's a sign of a decent human being who understands the role that he has in protection of Canadian society and members of Parliament. So my life wasn't in danger. My family's life wasn't in danger. It was just a piece of information that he felt was necessary for me to get. And I am grateful for it. And I never talked about it before because I didn't need to. But now I can give a really good contrast to whatever decision was made in 2021.
So let's take to the other side of that. That's sort of the administrative right thing to do. It had nothing to do with politics, clearly. There was no political implication there. There wasn't a consideration as far as you can tell.
None.
What's going on here? I mean, clearly they are so far down. I don't care what you think in terms of the politics of this. I can't imagine that the core liberal supporters are thinking, oh, well, there's an excuse for this somewhere. Because to your point, this is a slow drip that's turning into a fire hose.
Totally is. And the interesting thing for me is yesterday. What happened yesterday is the nail in the coffin, as far as I'm concerned, for Marco Mendicino's excuses as to why Michael Chong wasn't alerted. And it's this. When Michael was interviewed by the Globe and Mail, and they asked him, or he put out a statement, and they asked him, so you now know you've been briefed by CSIS. He said very clearly that the head of CSIS, Mr. Vigneault, told him that he was now authorized to read the report from July of 2021 to Michael. That's what he did. He read him the report, but he had to get authorization to do so. So who authorized him to let him to do it now in 2023, and who didn't authorize to do that in 2021?
So it begs the question, is there one throat to choke on this? I mean, is there a direct line?
Yeah, I think there is. I think somebody in somebody's office got the memo. Ministers' offices read everything. No question about it. You got to scan for this. And they didn't somebody decided not to take action on this. And so we want to know who, and then you want to know why. What was the consideration? Why is national security or the health and safety of Canadians, which are really the two only reasons why you would withhold this kind of information? What was the balance on that kind of stuff? Because What isn't a consideration is what's our relationship like with the Chinese. That's not a consideration. Health and safety, national security are the only two things that you should be looking at this piece of information through a lens. And, it's not like Michael is going to run to the press and tell anybody. This is personal information.
Well, and on the other hand, we still know that the diplomat, we understand, is still working here and functioning in Canada.
Yeah, and that's completely in the control of the Prime Minister. I think it's laughable that the Prime Minister's response in Parliament was, we take it very seriously and we're going to investigate. Investigate what? Investigate why you didn't allow people to let Michael know in 2021? We know where that's going to go. It's a black hole of platitudes to be able to say we're investigating. And it's just this culmination of story after story after story that needs to be brought together in one single place in one single time in a federal inquiry, period. And I don't know how David Johnson can't not get to that conclusion for his report, that there needs to be an inquiry.
For us, those of us who are in the weeds, paying attention, breathing this stuff constantly, that's one thing. And there's a certain frustration, anger, however you want to qualify that. On the other side of it is there's a lot of noise going on every other subject, including the price of groceries. How much does this actually cut through, or how likely do you think that this one is going to cut through? Let's put it that way, in terms of a general conversation about the credibility of this government.
Oh, this one cuts through. This one is going to be the one that's going to be talked about at breakfast tables and Tim Hortons coffee shops, people like you and I. Why? Because it's a real tangible example of the Chinese government going after a Canadian citizen's family in another country. And it's somebody that you know, because he's been on your television screens before. And it's somebody that harkens respect both from the Liberals, NDP, well, amongst Liberals, NDP, Conservative Bloc, Greens. I mean, everybody likes Michael Chong. He ran for the leader of the Conservative Party on a green platform, pro-carbon tax. So he's a progressive conservative, not in the general term, but he's a progressive conservative. And people may not remember, but he disagreed with Prime Minister Harper on a fundamental question when he was a minister, and he resigned from cabinet. I mean, this guy is super principled, and he brought the motion to the House of Parliament on the Uyghurs, and this is how he's being punished. And I think Canadians are going to pay attention to this one. I hope they do, because but for the grace of God, go I. Maybe it's easy to ignore when you think it's just a handful of families that have family back in mainland China who are being impacted. But this is a member of parliament who is proud of his heritage, who has family in Hong Kong and never lived in China himself, and is being targeted, and his family is being targeted. So that's a big deal. That's a big deal. So that, with the police stations, with everything else that's going on, I mean, it's got to be. I can be I'll be partisan and sarcastic for a second and just say the little potato really should be looking at this more closely.
All right. Well, that's our gong show on this side of the border. I was riding my Peloton yesterday, and I've got CNN on, and up flashes the graphic. They're going to hold a town hall, which is, kind of what they do. Anderson Cooper and company, they're pretty good at the town hall thing. At the center, on the stage, one former president of the United States, Donald Trump. And I'm thinking, what the hell meeting did they have where people thought this was a good idea to have Trump doing a town hall meeting on CNN? Just your initial reaction?
Oh, ratings, number one.
Entirely.
Ratings make CNN relevant again. And if they think they're going to control Trump, good luck. I mean, I think what characterizes me, Donald Trump, more than anything else, is that debate a million years ago between him and Hillary Clinton, where instead of standing stationary between two podiums while she's speaking, he's walking behind her pacing back and forth and back and forth. I mean, this guy is not, he's going to break every norm. He doesn't care. He's going to do whatever he needs to do to get his own message out to his people. And CNN's giving him the platform. They're going to try to, I think, I would say, put him in a box. It ain't going to happen.
Good luck.
Good luck with that. And then, his people will clip it. But I mean, talking inside politics, baseball, if I'm Ron DeSantis or if I'm Nikki Haley, I'd be worried now because they're going to help Trump win the nomination. CNN is now helping Trump win the nomination by giving him this platform on mainstream media for others to take a look at him again.
May 10th, by the way, in case you want to just stock up on the popcorn, 8 o'clock.
Wow.
So,
I'll be PVRing it.
I'm just thinking I don't want it to conflict with the Leaf game. So, depending on where we are with that
I
series.
think it does, actually,
so,
yeah.
Just can't be doing that. But to your point, though, from the media side of things, CNN has been making such a concerted effort and has been actually told that they can't be so left sympathetic, that they have to be having more guests on from the conservative and the GOP side of the aisle. And for me, as an observer, I enjoy that way more than listening to the left-wing whining or the right-wing craziness and all that nonsense. I mean, the whole Tucker Carlson distraction to me, I think, is hilarious. And what was in the text messages and the emails, and was he a misogynist and all that kind of stuff. It doesn't inform anything really that I think is going on as far as the news is concerned, but that's kind of where I live. Just on a note on there, it's for all of the power that Tucker Carlson has politically, his audience is barely 1% of the entire U.S. population.
Interesting.
So you think about, and I think this kind of goes back to the CNN effect with Trump, that the power of cable news in the United States is, they clearly punch way above their weight on that. The effect that they have, you may not watch, but you'll know he was on, right? You may not watch, but you'll see the clips. You may not watch, but it'll show up in other media that you're watching.
Yeah, it's true. And maybe this is an attempt for CNN to try to get back some of their luster rolling into all of these primaries that are coming up, so that they're going to get more. Because if you remember, they kind of fell off a cliff in ratings.
Oh, yeah.
And I think they want to get it back. At one point, they were the go-to, and now they're not. And, they got rid of Don Lemon, and now they're moving in. It'll be interesting to see who they put in the ring with them. I guess it's going to be Anderson Cooper, but it'll be interesting.
Yeah, and again, I'm not sure what the thinking is beyond your point, ratings. I mean, clearly they're going to.
Yeah. It is about ratings, about
that.
Reasserting themselves, saying that, and they're going to have to be careful of not to attack them.
Except, here's the problem that they have, and if all of a sudden you're the producer on that show, every time you're going to think you're asking him a question that's going to really take him to the mat and be accountable, he's going to judo you in a hurry. I mean, he's just going to flip that around, and he's going to be able to make comments about January 6th. He's going to be able to question the election results of 2020. There's no way you put that genie back in the bottle.
Yeah, it's true. And there's no one there to counter his arguments. It's not a debate. It's a town hall. So he's on blast the whole time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, it'll be interesting to watch that all unfold. But that will be the distraction. In the meantime, we've got the debt ceiling argument going on and all of that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know if you've got a thought on this. As I watch that unfold, and the threat, of the United States not being able to pay their bills, it's easy to say that's one of these domestic politics things that's going on. It occurs to me, if all of a sudden the Americans can't pay their bills, that's going to be a big rock in a small puddle, and we're going to feel that right around the world.
And we hit that before. I mean, if you recall, I can't remember which administration it was, but it was in December, and they started sending people home. Public
shutting
workers
down government.
They're shutting down government, and it was over the Christmas between November and December, and people were just told, you're not coming in to get paid. And that's the ultimate check and balance on this whole thing, because it'll be who's to blame, on this situation, and a lot of jockeying for position. And what is the Speaker of the Congress going to look like? The House, what's the Speaker of the Senate going to look like? And they're in it for themselves too. Like the politics there are as much personal as they are party driven, and everyone's going to want to make a name for themselves. And it's fascinating politics down there, I have to say.
Yeah, well, and I can't wait to see what the reactions are post game once Trump's town hall is finished, and how the apologists line up on both sides to say, "Oh, well, he did well," or just completely ignore something outrageous, and we know he will say something outrageous. So that is May the 10th, 8 o'clock on CNN. We had the opportunity to talk to Rosemary Thompson on our podcast called Canadian Forestry Can Save the World. And we were working with the folks at the Forestry for the Future, and among others, the groups that were involved with the Forest Product Association of Canada. So it's a long way around of saying we sat down with Derek Nybor at FPAC and Rosemary, and we had a whole conversation about the report from the Coalition for a Better Future. And, I don't know if your ears were buzzing or not, but your name came up in that conversation.
There you go.
Just in terms of your involvement with the coalition. And at that point, we were talking about the scorecard around sustainability and so on. And, even based on this threat of recession and the economic crisis that we could face, even, peripherally, if the Americans can't pay their bills, there's a real concern here to begin with. If that happens, it amplifies it more. And I think Rosemary made the point more often than not, and very loudly in the course of our conversation, was that we are punching way below our weight in this country. That, as far as economic sustainability, we're not on track to actually support the services and the infrastructure and the educational and healthcare needs that we're going to need. Not way down the road. We're talking about, for my kids and my grandkids, happening right now.
Yeah.
What's I don't know, there's no turnkey here.
Yeah.
But what do we need to do to sort of flip that switch, whether it's awareness, culturally, politically? Because this is kind of urgent.
It's very urgent, and it has long-term impacts. So the Coalition for a Better Future is 140 organizations. I co-chair it with Anne McClellan, and I tell you that because this is a concerted cross-partisan effort. We are leaving the politics out of this, and we display that by having a former Conservative cabinet minister and a former Liberal deputy prime minister at the helm. We don't always agree on stuff, and that's okay. What we do agree on is that any government in this country, whatever order it is, has to have a long-term plan for economic growth. So that's the fundamental principle. We were coming out of COVID, and there was this anticipation that the economy was going to catch on fire and it was going to be great. And we were talking about building back better and how we're going to do it. So the first message of the coalition is we need to have a long-term plan for growth and don't waste the opportunity. And the second message from the coalition is what this long-term growth has to look like. It has to be sustainable and it has to be inclusive. So those are the kinds of things that we mark in a scorecard. And we say that if we hit these 21 metrics and we hit the targets that we set for 2030, Canada will be at the front of the pack in economic growth that makes sense for our country, that includes everybody. So that was the opening premise of it. In the last 2 years, what we've seen is that the Building Back Better concept has really, I would say, fallen away to the point where we're worried about a recession, we're worried about the future. So now the message is the same, but with a little bit of a different context, which is don't lose the forest for the trees, to use an FPAC analogy. You need to still think about what the long term looks like. And where we find ourselves talking in terms of long-term growth is on what's happening in the United States and Canada in our movement towards a net zero world in 2050, which is being guided by policy decisions of governments trying to move markets in certain ways. And you do it either by incenting markets to invest. That's what the US is doing with all of their tax incentives and production incentives. Or in Canada, where it's a mixture of those tax incentives and heavy regulations like caps on emissions for oil and gas production. And amongst all of that, you have to continue to ensure that we're competitive with the United States, we fit into their vision for supply chain, and that we're solidifying and seizing opportunities that are going to be in the long term for us. So the concept remains the same since the beginning, but we have to really recognize the fact that we've gone from where we think we've got this coiled spring of economic activity that was going to burst forward from a pandemic to our reality, which is we feel like we're a slinky, like you're kind of going back and forth and you don't really know where you're going. And at the end of the day, you're not going anywhere because you're just like oscillating between one end and another. And we really need to be able to help push forward. So we measure where others don't. But what we don't do is we don't give policy advice and we don't lobby. What we will say is you've got to make sure you're part of the net zero transition because there's a big economy around it and we got to compete. And we also say that if you're building the next generation economy, health, education, immigration really do matter. You got to get those things right. But fundamentally, the big, I would say, alarm that we're ringing is, guys, we've had weak anemic growth since 2015. And before that, going back to the Great Recession in 2009, 2010, it's been weak economic growth. And we've got to do better. We've got to do better.
There are economic indicators, and then there are food bank visits. Mm-hmm. And I talked to my friend at Daily Bread Food Bank, Neil Hetherington. He's the CEO there. And you bring up the recession from the financial crisis. He says they are still dealing today with the effect of that recession at the food banks. And he fully expected that, it would kind of plateau as we got into the 2020s. Yeah. And then, of course, here's where we are. And now we look at the number of visits to food bank, 270,000 visits a month in Toronto alone as of, I think, February or March. There was a professor out of Calgary, University of Calgary, who did some research for the food bank and talked about the direct impact of government policy on food bank visits. And I know it sounds like I'm getting off on a tangent, but I'll bring you back.
No, I'm following you.
But the idea here is that when we look at minimum wage, if you adjust minimum wage, you can see the adjustment in food bank visits. Mm-hmm. That they have become no lagging indicator. They are a present, clear economic indicator in front of us. And that curve is not going down. It's like a hockey stick. It's on the way. Yeah. So you mentioned 2030. We talk about the poverty reduction plan. We talk about the climate emissions reduction plans. Everything's happening around 2030, 2050. And it doesn't sound far away. We've got an aging population that's all of a sudden going to need a different level of service in 2030 to 2050. Who has to hold the pen on this? Because it's a really big subject to get your arms around.
Yeah, all of us do. So that's why we say it's a project for not only the governments, but it's also business community, big and small business, medium size, and the big corporates. And it's also civil society, like the people who run the food banks or the community foundations. All of those, by the way, are members of our coalition because we all understand the importance of long-term growth. To your story, though, there are performance indicators that reflect what's happening at food banks. And there's two that actually are the overall indicators for us. One is, where's Canada on the prosperity index in the world? And we're dropping like a balloon, like a lead balloon. So we have gone down to 15th or 14th, whereas we were in the top 10 before. And that's been a slow decline over the last number of years, 15 years. But even more important is this measurement of GDP per capita. And that kind of tells you what the median income looks like in the country. We're 20 grand lower than the United States. That's your purchasing power. That's your buying power. And it continues to decrease. We need new data because we have old data. We're looking at 2021 numbers. We need the recent stuff coming out of COVID, and that will be coming fairly soon. But that is your purchasing power out of what you make is exactly what drives you to a food bank in order to supplement. So these measures or these key performance indicators are really important in the here and now, and that's why every year annually the Telfer School of Business at the Carleton University or University of Ottawa, sorry, University of Ottawa Telfer School of Business does the measuring for us with their postdocs and their PhD candidates. So it's neutral, third party. They scan the universe for all the information. They come back and tell us, and then we communicate with business and with communities as to how we're doing and where can business do better, increase productivity, increase investment in their people, increase training, upskill. Like it's everybody's got to work on this because you just can't watch it happen. And we've been kind of watching this slow motion car crash, and we've got to do better as a society than to say, oh yeah, the crash is happening. Oh yeah, it's going to be bad. And think about how to deal with the victims. Let's try to prevent the crash. Let's put our efforts into preventing it.
Is the biggest problem, though, somebody's going to throw up their hands and say, how can we possibly afford that? You're talking about, whether it's increasing training or professional development or healthcare services. Everybody's going to hear cha-ching, cha-ching, cha-ching. The question I think that we stumble over is how can we afford that? My question back is how can we not afford to do it? We can't afford poverty, for one thing, and we can't afford not to have affordable, stable housing. We can't afford not to have suitable health care. So at what point do we need to begin to really look at the way we do business effectively, whether it's in government or in business, and to say we need to, I won't say break it and rebuild it, but we really need to give it a shake to say that doing it the way we used to do it isn't an option anymore.
So I had my personal X factor in this. Everyone has that moment when they realize they have to become engaged in helping prevent the future as it looks right now. And I'll tell you what it was. As you know, Dave, and I talk about it a lot, my husband has young onset Alzheimer's. And there comes a point in time when you have young onset Alzheimer's where you just cannot look after them in the home. You cannot. They need 24-hour care. You can't afford to bring in nursing. It's about $240,000 a year if you want to do 24/7 nursing in your home around the clock. You can't afford that. I mean, it's just not possible. So where do families end up going? To the long-term care system in the country. And that system is overloaded, and it's a 2-year wait list unless you're an emergency case. And I just realized that people don't understand that dementia isn't something that you have for 18 months. It's something you have for 10 years. And it's going to take a bigger precedence and predominance in our society as we age, because the stats don't lie, and you've got a 3 in 5 chance or a 4 in 5 chance of developing dementia over 80. And you got a 2 in 5 or a 1 in 5 chance of developing it when you're over 65. And those are big numbers for the system to handle. And if we don't have economic growth to pay for it, then the level of care is going to decline. And it's very, very, very real. So for me, I wanted to get involved with long-term growth because we need to be able to pay for the services that we need in the future. And if you think the system is bad now, just wait. Just wait till the boomer comes through even more and that we get more diagnoses and we don't have systems in place because you just physically cannot look after some patients at home.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think the prediction was the baby boom generation will all be of retirement age by the middle of the next decade. So, start to look at it that way.
Yeah.
I, again, don't want to leave it on what is a down note. I think it's a poignant note, and I think it spawns another conversation because there's more to be said around that. So we hope you'll come back and join us again on the podcast.
I will, Dave. Thanks for having me.
Lisa Raitt, thank you.
Now
Coming next is produced by Becky Coles. Our production manager is Jamie Nickerson. Audio editors are Mike Trutler and Drew Garner. And our sonic logo designer is Greg McDonald. Our executive producers are Dave and Aaron Trafford.
This is SSN.
Story Studio Network.